r/AskReddit. What's a conspiracy theory that later got proven to be true? Armstrong was using an elaborate international blood transfusion scheme to cheat at bike racing. Bonus for fans of very juvenile humor. The first president of the World Anti-Doping Agency's name is Dong Pound. Jeffrey Epstein was trafficking women and children for some very elite people on a temple island. Crazy but true. You know, I remember reading that Hunter S. Thompson was working on the story of his lifetime. One that involved a child pedophilia ring that involved many of the world's most powerful people, and that it ran all the way up to the White House during the Bush Sr. administration. Before he could publish the story, he was found having committed suicide. Many of his friends and family had publicly questioned the suicide, in part because Thompson had said he was worried about being taken out in just such a way. I have a feeling that he was pulling on some threads that would have led to this whole Epstein ring. People forget that Thompson was an actual journalist. The FBI really was eavesdropping on Dr. King and Ernest Hemingway, which may have contributed to his suicide. Project MKUltra. The CIA really was experimenting on unsuspecting citizens to determine the effects of LSD, specifically as relates to mind control. Government surveillance is the most obvious one. They're charging the birds as we speak. Apple slows down older iPhones with software updates. They said it was to help reduce the load on the batteries as they lose performance with age, so a slower phone would make the batteries last longer. Not sure if legit or just taking advantage of that quirk in batteries and overestimating the benefit of their solution. The Bruce MacArthur story is a weird one. For 7 years there was a conspiracy theory of a serial killer specifically targeting gay men around Toronto was floating around, but it could never be proven until eventually enough evidence came up implicating him and he got caught in a sting operation. This was crazy. Still is unbelievable. Hiding the victims in planters etc. A rival of Thomas Jefferson revealed to the press that Jefferson had had an affair and several children with an enslaved person he owned, Sally Hemings, who was actually his late wife's half-sister. It was adamantly denied by the Jefferson family and historic foundations until recent DNA testing revealed it had been true. Edit. Just for further context, their arrangement was made while both Sally and Thomas were in France, where he was serving as American ambassador. At the time, Jefferson was age 44-46 while Hemings was age 14-16, and while Sally was a free woman while in France, there was certainly personal power dynamics at play. Sally being only 1/8 African herself and by many accounts was passable. Who could have chosen to stay in France, which was in poverty at the time on the edge of the French Revolution, made the decision to return to slavery in America under the stipulation that any children she would have would be freed at age 21. Sally also had a brother, James, who Jefferson brought to France to be trained in French cuisine, who also agreed to return to enslavement. To give context, whether there was affection and legitimate romance is unclear, as their relationship was never legitimized in Jefferson's writings or otherwise. The writings left from Sally's children say he never showed them any affection, though the Hemings were said to have received preferential treatment even before the arrangement. All 5 of Sally's surviving children were freed under the agreement, and when Jefferson died, Sally was given her time. No longer given forced tasks but never freed. When Sally died, she was buried in an unmarked enslaved person's grave. That we've had a female president before. There was a theory that Roosevelt was ill and bedridden for the latter part of his second term in office, and that his wife was secretly running the show, making most of the decisions. Turns out it was true. Many people who were part of Roosevelt's staff at the time admitted it years later. Look into the last few months of President Wilson's life. He was a vegetable, and his doctor and wife were gatekeeping and making decisions in his name. When I listened to the Slate podcast Slow Burn about Watergate, they mentioned how to a lot people it seemed to be the first vindicated conspiracy theory since it was first reported by tabloids and whatnot. The Epstein case really opened the door to conspiracies for me. I lost all trust in our government. Like, this man had dirt on tons of high-level politicians and celebrities and magically kills himself before he has to testify, and nobody seems to be aggressively getting to the bottom of it. He was running child sex rings with world leaders. What the actual duck? Why are we not up in arms over this? What's also shocking to me is how little the media covered it and how it's pretty much already blown over. What else has the government covered up? That China harvests organs from their prisoners. The first rumors came out in the early 2000s, but everyone dismissed it since it came from Falun Gong practitioners, which were like a Chinese Buddhist cult. If you lived in any major city, you'd see them passing out flyers and protesting in front of Chinese embassies, and no one believed them. 20 years later, we all know it to be true. That the government was monitoring our phones. Hell, the government monitored all telegraph messages 100 years ago. It may seem unthinkable now, but just a few decades ago the idea that the Catholic Church was knowingly harboring pedophiles among its ranks and would move those child molesters to different locations with fresh victims when the people at their current location became suspicious was thought to be a conspiracy theory only believed by total tinfoil hat nutcases. Shame it turned out to be horribly true, and the Catholic Church still hasn't cleaned up their act. If the choir boys are in less danger now, it's not because the church has cracked down on the predators. It's because normal people now know not to leave their kid alone with Father McFilly. Panama Papers. This was forgotten so quickly. Edit. I can't remember if anyone was punished for this. 30 years ago my aunt and uncle, educated scientists, told me that Harvard and the other Ivy Leagues had a secret quota they used to keep Asians limited. I stupidly thought this was crazy because I was repeatedly told affirmative action can only help you, not hurt you, and here we are. I've heard that calculations show that if affirmative action rules are lifted, whites would massively drop from universities because South Asian and East Asian students would increase. People missing the proven to be true part of the question. The Lincoln assassination. That was a true conspiracy, with shadowy meetings and plans and everything. Besides Lincoln, they planned to kill the VP Johnson and Secretary of State Seward. Unlike movie conspirators, most of these guys were dolts. The VP assassin chickened out. Seward's would-be assassin succeeded in seriously wounding him but failed to kill him. JWB succeeded but was caught and killed a couple weeks later. They were all rounded up, and in the heat of the times were executed. Even Mary Surratt, who owned the boarding house where they met, was hanged. The doctor who set Booth's leg, broken during the escape, got 20 years in prison. People don't think of it as a classic conspiracy, because there wasn't a government or state-sponsored hand behind it. Try as they might, the feds could never find any proof that the Confederate leadership had anything to do with it, but it was a conspiracy nonetheless. That the FBI was heavily involved in drug distribution to lower income predominantly black neighborhoods a few decades back. Edit. CIA, not FBI. That government agents keep asking this on Reddit to see if there are any new leaks. No one gonna bring up Operation Sea Spray. The Navy was testing bacterial weaponry in 1950 on San Francisco. They released pathogens off the shore and calculated that there was enough for the whole population to get a dose. Caused a spike in urinary tract infections and a guy died. So not to minimize the severity, but it kinda gave me a chuckle when you end with one guy died because it doesn't seem serious, but it really is. CIA was responsible for the death of nuclear physicist Homi Bhabha, who wanted to extract India's thorium reserves to create the nation's 3-stage nuclear power program. A journalist who taped interviews with a former CIA operative, Robert Crowley Talks, later made this public. There was an old conspiracy theory that during Prohibition the government was poisoning alcohol to prevent people from drinking, and even up the strength of the poison. Apparently 10,000 people died. That Michael Jackson's father had him chemically castrated. His doctor confirmed it after his death. The CIA is not listening to you. Neither is the FBI. It's the NSA that does the spying. The CIA overthrows governments and the FBI intimidates civil rights advocates. The 2017 Jacksonville Jaguars were frauds. Jason? One that got proven false was the Rosenbergs were falsely accused, which was a subject of many documentaries in the 70s and 80s. After the fall of USSR, it was proven they were spies. E.T. Atari game being buried in the desert after being a total failure. Concentration camps. There were several reports to Allied governments about them. No one believed it until the US Army started liberating them, at least the scale of it. Operation Paperclip. That girl from Smallville being involved in a sex cult. Whoa. You made it to the end, you're a ducking beast. I'll cut you a deal. Smash like and subscribe for more curated content, bruh. It's free and that's a great price.